Hello, Nutrition 101. Welcome to part 3 of chapter 3. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about elimination as well as metabolism. So we have the large intestines, and you remember at the last part of part 2, chapter 3, we had just absorbed most nutrients. So most nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine, in the duodenum. Most carbs are absorbed. In the jejunum, we have a little bit of protein and fat. In the ileum, it's a little bit of minerals, maybe a little bit of the leftover protein and fat. So at this point, most of the absorbable nutrients have been absorbed. We then enter the large intestine. So the large intestines have a few different parts. We have the cecum, we have the ascending colon, which travels up the left side of the body, the transverse, which travels across, the descending colon, which travels down the right side of the body, and then the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and the anus. And so the rectum stores the feces, and then the anal canal excretes the feces when the nervous system stimulates it. The large intestines are much shorter than the small intestines. So remember, small intestines are about 18 feet long, and the large intestines are only 5 feet long. A little bit of absorption takes place here, mostly of water, and that's to prepare the feces for excretion, as well as some vitamins and minerals. There are healthy bacteria in the large intestines, and they digest some nutrients and make vitamin K and some B vitamins. So those bacteria will help digest fiber. That's what all the talk about probiotics is about, is creating a healthy bacteria environment in those large intestines. So we also call that microflora. So the rectum is the last 8 inches of the large intestines, and it stores the feces. And feces, of course, are undigested, unabsorbed material, dead cells, secretions from the GI tract, water, and bacteria. And so all of the content of the feces, you can think of, it's never actually entered your body. It's just gone through the GI tract, but it's never been inside your body. Only what's absorbed is inside, the bloodstream, and can affect your body that way. However, anything traveling through your gut can really affect, the health of your body, because you have all these immune factors in the GI tract as well that are going to fight foreign invaders. It's really the first line of defense there. So there are 2 types of products that help us with beneficial bacteria. One is called probiotics, and probiotics are foods that contain beneficial bacteria. So you could think of probiotics as yogurt and things like that. Activia adds extra prebiotics, and so that's going to add even more of this supporting system for the large intestine. That's why they can have all the different health claims on them. And prebiotics are foods containing a food supply for beneficial bacteria. So we want more beneficial bacteria and less harmful bacteria, and that's going to help keep us more regular, help keep our immune function high, and help us not have gastrointestinal related issues as well. And so here's just a little summary of the digestive system. So when we look at our GI tract, we have our mouth, our pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestines, large intestines, rectum, and then you can say anal canal at the end too. It won't fit on this page. But when we look at this, the mouth is the starting point. Pharynx and esophagus, the food travels through. The stomach, food's stored there for a while. Protein starts to be digested. Small intestines are where most of the action happens in terms of digestion and absorption. Large intestines, you finish off that absorption and prepare for excretion, and rectum and anus store for excretion and then excrete once the nervous system stimulates that to happen. So as I mentioned, about 70% of your immune system is actually contained in your digestive system. It's that first line of defense. A number of foods contain antigens, molecules that are recognized by the immune system. And these disease-causing organisms, which are pathogens, have antigens on their surfaces. So our immune system is going to recognize those antigens and they're going to say, hey, we don't want you in the body. So they prevent absorption from occurring and will destroy those pathogens before they get into our body. So we have a couple of different types. So we have our phagocytes, which eat organisms, and then our lymphocytes, which destroyed infected cells, or secrete antibodies, which then bind to the antigens and destroy them. So as you can see, these are little soldiers standing around in our intestines and in our stomach and even in our mouth, and they're just protecting our body from having diseases. This is just showing, the immune system, the lymphocytes and the phagocytes under a little microscope there. So food allergies, there's differences between allergies and intolerances. So an allergy is actually a reaction to the immune system, whereas an intolerance is just a reaction inside the GI tract. So the immune system reacts to non-harmful antigens, and these are called allergens. So it's almost like your immune system thinks that certain proteins are antigens, even though they're not actually harmful to the body. The first exposure begins the process with production of antibodies, and then in the second exposure, allergens bind to the antibodies and cause the release of histamines. And in that process, you can see redness, swelling, hives, tingling on the tongue, difficulty breathing, decreased blood pressure, vomiting, cramps. You might see diarrhea and things like that too. And there are a number of different major allergens. You can put that on the label in a couple of different ways. So, for example, on this can of nuts, you can see the ingredients are cashews, peanut oil, and or cottonseed oil, and salt. And then the allergen information, you might say, contains cashews or contains peanuts. If that's in the ingredients list, you don't necessarily have to list it as well. A lot of manufacturers are quite careful to tell consumers as well that their product might be processed in a facility that also processes other products that could be contaminated. So we see here peanuts, other tree nuts, milk, soy, and wheat. So celiac disease is a little bit different. So celiac disease is an inherited disease. It is a reaction to gluten in wheat, barley, or rye. The gluten acts as an antigen. So the immune system responds to that gluten as an antigen, just like almost like an allergen, but the immune response in this case damages the villi, so it's a little bit different than that histamine response. And as we damage the villi, it takes those 18 feet that include little villi all over them. Remember I said they're about the surface area of 2 tennis courts, including all the villi and microvilli. They just wipe them out. So instead of having 2 tennis courts worth of surface area of absorption, you only have about 18 feet of absorption. So you can see a lot of malnutrition with this. It's possible that it's weight loss. It's also possible that it is just micronutrient deficiencies as well, so things like anemia, osteoporosis because calcium can't be absorbed. You might also see intestinal cancers and other chronic diseases. So celiac disease is a lot bigger issue than people think, because a lot of times people mix that up with gluten intolerance, and gluten intolerance is just a GI response, not an immune response. So gluten-free has become pretty popular, and when we look at the reasons for its popularity is a lot of people think they'll lose weight if they're gluten-free, but you can eat a pretty energy-dense, nutrient-devoid diet even eating a gluten-free diet. So perhaps you can't have onion rings, right? But you can still have greasy French fries, right? So gluten-free diets often limit people's access to some refined carbohydrates because they can't eat wheat products. But, now manufacturers are making all sorts of gluten-free products, and there are, once you get used to the diet, plenty of opportunities to have some unhealthy gluten-free products as well. So it's not necessarily the best diet, but it's really necessary to have gluten-free diet if you have celiac disease. So heartburn and gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. Heartburn occurs when the stomach contents move from the stomach into the esophagus through the sphincter. Remember that stomach has an extra layer of skin or epithelial tissue, and the esophagus doesn't. So if the acid from the stomach travels back into the esophagus, then there can be a whole lot of pain there. If that's chronic, which means if that happens often, you can see that not only is there a burning sensation, pain, and bleeding, it could also result in some ulcers and in cancer in the long term. Peptic ulcers. So the GI tract, as I mentioned before, is protected from the acid pepsin by mucus, as well as that extra little skin that it has. Ulcers can occur in the esophagus, the stomach, or the small intestines from damage to the lining by stomach acid and pepsin. So a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori can disrupt that little second layer of skin and eliminate that mucus, and you'll see, almost like it looks like a cold sore or something in the stomach. Aspirin can strip that layer too, and other pain relievers as well. So when we look at other pain relievers that might do this, Aleve is a big one that can cause stomach issues as well. That's also called naproxen when it's given to you by a doctor, a pharmacist. And so complications, pain, bleeding, these can be really painful and cause a lot of trouble with people's GI tracts. A lot of times people will have surgery and possibly have them removed, but then of course that causes even more risk of complications. So gallstones. So we have gallstones. What they are is solid material that accumulates in the gallbladder and the bile ducts and blocks bile, and so you have pretty painful symptoms. So gallbladder can be removed if gallstones end up being chronic, and what ends up happening is that after the gallbladder is removed, bile can just drip into the small intestines rather than being secreted when fat's consumed. So a lot of times people need to eat a little bit lower fat diet because that bile is just dripping slowly into the GI tract rather than being like squeezed like a little squeegee bottle out of the gallbladder, because the gallbladder is just a little storage area. We don't necessarily need it for bile production. We just need it for bile storage and possibly for adequate, amount of bile in the GI tract. So diarrhea occurs when substances move too quickly through the large intestines for water to be absorbed. This can be caused by a number of different issues. So infections, irritants, medication, diseases, and then of course it can cause pain, some dehydration, and malnutrition. If things are moving through too quickly, then they just don't have the opportunity for absorption. And then constipation, of course, is the opposite, and that's caused by too little water in the diet, too much or too little fiber, no exercise, also decreased strength of large intestinal muscles, and medications as well. So this is just showing some of the issues with the ulcers. You see on the bottom left hand, you can see the acidic contents going back up into the esophagus. When we look at the GERD or gastroesophageal reflux disease. So when we look at these different issues, they can cause a lot of complications with our lives, and this is even causing complications before nutrients actually get into our body. So next time we're going to talk a good amount about the metabolism and what happens once those nutrients actually get into our body. And so that will be part 4 of chapter 3. Thanks for listening in about excretion and digestive system disorders.